Maggie Holloway pressed her dying daughter against her chest and screamed into the rain. 3 days without food. 4 months without hope. The tent had collapsed an hour ago, and now she knelt in the Montana mud, her 2 other children shivering behind her, watching their baby sister fade. "Please," she whispered to a God she wasn't sure was listening anymore. "Take me instead." That's when she heard the horse. That's when Caleb McAllister rode out of the storm and changed everything. But before I tell you how this broken mother found love in the last place she expected, please subscribe to my channel, stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Maggie's story has traveled. The child had stopped crying 2 hours ago. That terrified Maggie more than the storm. Letty always cried. At 3 years old, she cried when she was hungry, cried when she was cold, cried when the thunder got too loud. But now the little girl lay limp in Maggie's arms, her breath shallow, her skin burning with fever, despite the freezing rain soaking through what remained of their shelter. "Mama!" Lucy's voice cut through the howling wind. "Mama, the tent's coming down!" Maggie looked up. Her 9-year-old stood in ankle-deep mud, both hands gripping a tent pole that was bending like a reed in the gale. Behind her 6-year-old Hank pressed against the single canvas wall still standing, his thin arms wrapped around their last bag of belongings. "Hold it, Lucy. Just hold it." "I can't, Mama. I can't." The pole snapped. Canvas came down like a shroud, heavy and wet, smothering them in darkness. Maggie heard Lucy scream, heard Hank crying somewhere to her left, felt Letty's tiny body jerk against her chest. "Lucy, Hank." She fought the canvas with one arm, the other clutching her youngest. Rain poured through a tear above her head, cold as ice water flooding the hollow where they'd made their bed for the past 3 months. Her hand found Lucy's arm, pulled the girl close. Hank crawled toward them, sobbing. "It's all right." The lie tasted like bile. "It's all right, we just need to—" Lightning split the sky. In that white flash, Maggie saw everything. The muddy pool rising around her knees, the canvas pressing down like a burial cloth. Her children's faces pale and terrified looking at her for answers she didn't have. And beyond the ruined tent, through a gap in the fallen canvas, she saw the shapes moving in the darkness. Men on horseback. Her blood went cold. "Stay quiet." She pressed Lucy and Hank down into the mud, covered them with her body as best she could while still holding Letty. "Whatever happens, stay quiet." The Wyoming Territory in 1878 was no place for a woman alone. Maggie had learned that lesson written in hunger and rejection, in the eyes of men who saw a widow with 3 children and calculated what she might be worth. Some had offered work that wasn't work. Others had simply taken what they wanted and left her with less than nothing. She had the pistol. William's old Navy Colt, tucked in her waistband even now. 3 bullets left. She'd been saving them for months, not sure what for. Protection, maybe. Or maybe for something worse on the nights when Letty cried from hunger and Lucy asked questions Maggie couldn't answer. The hoofbeats stopped somewhere close. "Hello," a man's voice deep and rough. "Anyone alive in there?" Maggie's hand found the pistol grip. Her finger touched the trigger. "I seen your camp from the ridge, saw the tent go down. You need help." Lucy squirmed beneath her. "Mama, maybe he—" "Quiet." "Ma'am, I ain't gonna hurt you. Name's Caleb McAllister. I'm foreman at Sterling Creek Ranch about 4 miles east. Got a cabin there, got a fire going. You and yours can't stay out here tonight. Storm's gonna get worse before it gets better." Maggie didn't move, didn't answer. Just held her children and prayed he'd go away right off into the rain and leave them to whatever fate the night would bring. He didn't. "I can hear you breathing in there, ma'am. I can hear the young ones, too. I'm gonna come closer now. Gonna help you get that canvas off. Don't shoot me, all right? I'm just trying to help." Footsteps in the mud. Slow, careful. Then hands gripping the edge of the canvas, lifting it away from Maggie's face. Rain poured in, but so did a sliver of gray light, and in it she saw him. Tall, broad shoulders straining against a soaked coat, dark hair plastered to his forehead beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and brown eyes that looked down at her with something she couldn't name. Not pity, not calculation. Something else. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, when he saw Letty's slack face, Lucy's shivering form, Hank's silent tears. "How long you been out here like this?" Maggie raised the pistol. It shook in her hand, but she aimed it square at his chest. "Back away!" He didn't flinch, didn't even look at the gun, just kept his eyes on hers. "Ma'am, your little one needs to get warm and dry right now. You can shoot me later if you want, but let me help her first." "I don't need your help." "With respect, ma'am, I think you do." Thunder crashed overhead so loud it seemed to shake the earth. Letty whimpered the first sound she'd made in hours, and Maggie felt her heart crack. "My cabin's close," Caleb said gentler now. "Dry, warm, I got food, I got blankets, I got everything you need to get through this night." He paused. "I ain't asking for nothing in return except you let me help you. That's all. Just let me help." Lucy's voice small and desperate. "Mama, please." The gun wavered. Maggie looked at her daughter. Saw the plea in those two old eyes. Saw the way Lucy was already trusting this stranger, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. She looked at Hank, teeth chattering so hard she could hear them clicking. She looked at Letty, barely conscious, burning up with fever in her arms. She lowered the pistol. "If you try anything, I won't. If you hurt my children, I'd die first." He said it simple, like he was stating the weather. Then he reached down and lifted Lucy clean out of the mud, set her on her feet, did the same with Hank. "Can you walk, boy?" Hank nodded mute. "Good. Stay close to your sister. Ma'am, can you carry the little one? Or you need me to?" "I've got her." Maggie struggled to her feet, legs numb from kneeling in cold water. The world tilted. She stumbled. Caleb caught her arm, steadied her. His grip was firm but not rough. "Easy. You ain't eaten in a while, I'm guessing." She wanted to lie. Pride demanded it. But her body betrayed her, swaying against his hold, and she found she couldn't form the words. "All right." He whistled sharp and short, and a horse emerged from the darkness, a big sorrel mare with kind eyes. "This here's Bella. She'll carry us. Lucy, Hank, you're gonna ride up front all right. Hold on to the saddle horn. Your mama and I will be right behind you with your sister." He lifted the children onto the horse like they weighed nothing at all. Then he turned to Maggie, held out his hand. "Trust me," he said. "Just for tonight. That's all I'm asking." Maggie looked at his hand. Large, calloused, waiting. She thought about William, about how he'd promised her a new life out west. How he'd sworn they'd build something beautiful together. How he'd died in a stranger's boarding house, coughing blood, while she held his hand and begged God for a miracle that never came. She thought about the 3 months since. The tent. The hunger. The nights she'd seriously considered using those 3 bullets on herself and the children, because anything seemed better than watching them slowly starve. She took his hand. "If you're lying to me," she said, as he helped her onto the horse, Letty still clutched against her chest. "I'll kill you. I swear to God I will." "I believe you, ma'am." He swung up behind her, one arm, coming around to gather the reins, the other resting at his side, not touching her. "Now hold on. We're gonna move fast." The ride was a blur of rain and darkness. Maggie felt Lucy pressed against her knees, felt Hank's small body trembling in front of his sister. She felt Caleb's chest solid against her back, sheltering them from the worst of the wind. And she felt Letty's fever burning through her clothes, hot as a coal. "How much further?" she shouted over the storm. "Close! Real close!" Lightning flashed. In that instant of white light, Maggie saw it, a cabin, small but solid, smoke rising from a stone chimney despite the gale. It looked like a mirage, like something from a dream she'd stopped allowing herself to have. Caleb pulled Bella to a halt, right at the front door, dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. He had Lucy down in seconds, then Hank pushing them toward the cabin. "Get inside. Fire's going. Warm up." The children ran. Maggie tried to dismount and nearly fell, her legs refusing to work. Caleb caught her again, caught Letty too, keeping them both upright with an ease that spoke of strength he didn't flaunt. "I got you. Come on." Inside the cabin was warm. That was all Maggie could process at first. Warmth, blessed warmth after months of cold nights and damp mornings. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace. Lamplight glowed soft and golden, and it was dry. God help her, it was dry. She stumbled toward the fire, sank down on the wooden floor in front of it, still holding Letty. The little girl's eyes were closed, her breathing ragged. "She's burning up." Maggie heard her own voice crack. "She's so hot. I don't know what to. I tried to keep her warm, but then the fever started and I didn't have any medicine. I didn't have anything." "Hey." Caleb knelt beside her, his voice low and calm. "We're gonna help her. But first, I need you to let me look at her, all right? Can you do that?" Maggie's arms tightened instinctively around her daughter. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to protect, to guard, to trust no one. "Ma'am." Caleb waited until she met his eyes. "Maggie. That's your name, right? Saw it on the papers in your tent when I was looking for survivors." She nodded, unable to speak. "Maggie, I'm gonna help your daughter. I ain't gonna hurt her. But I need you to trust me enough to let me try. Can you do that?" Lucy appeared at Maggie's shoulder. "Let him help Mama, please." Slowly, every instinct fighting against it, Maggie loosened her grip on Letty. Caleb gathered the child, gently laid her on the bed against the far wall. He touched her forehead, her cheeks pressed his ear against her chest. "It's the wet and cold," he said after a moment. "Fever's fighting it off, but she needs to be dry and warm. Lucy, there's blankets in that chest by the door. Hank, I need you to put more wood on the fire. Can you do that, son?" Both children moved to obey, responding to the calm authority in his voice. Maggie watched frozen as Caleb stripped Letty's soaked clothes, with quick efficiency, wrapped her in a dry blanket, positioned her close to the fire. "She needs to sweat it out," he said. "Keep her warm, keep her hydrated. I got some broth I can heat up. It ain't medicine, but it'll help." He looked at Maggie. "You need to get dry too. All of you. There's clothes in that chest. They'll be too big, but they're clean. I'll step outside while you change." In the storm. "I've weathered worse." He was already moving toward the door. "Get dry. Get warm. I'll be back in 10 minutes to check on the little one." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Maggie alone with her children in this stranger's cabin. Lucy was the first to speak. "Mama, is Letty going to be okay?" Maggie looked at her youngest wrapped in blankets by the fire, still too pale, still breathing too fast. She looked at Lucy and Hank, shivering and exhausted but alive. She looked around the cabin, the solid walls, the warm fire, the shelves stocked with food. "I don't know, baby," she whispered, "but we're going to try." They changed into dry clothes as quickly as Maggie's numb fingers would allow. The shirt and pants she found were massive on her, clearly meant for a man twice her size, but they were dry, and that was all that mattered. She dressed Lucy and Hank in similar oversized garments, rolling up sleeves and cuffs until they could function. By the time Caleb returned, stamping mud off his boots on the front porch, they almost looked human again. "Feeling better?" he asked, moving immediately to check on Letty. "Yes." Maggie's voice came out rusty. "Thank you." He nodded, not looking up from his examination of the child. "Fever's down a bit already. She's a fighter, this one." He straightened. "I'm gonna heat up that broth. You should eat too. All of you. When's the last time you had a real meal?" The silence stretched. Maggie felt shame burn her cheeks hot as Letty's fever. "That long, huh?" Caleb moved to the small stove in the corner, started building up the fire beneath a pot. "Well, we'll fix that tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." "There is no next for us, Mr. McAllister." The words came out harder than she intended. "We have nothing. No money, no shelter, no prospects. The only reason we're alive is because dying turned out to be harder than I expected." He paused at the stove, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, "You got 3 children who need their mother. That seems like a pretty good reason to keep going to me. And when we leave here tomorrow, when we go back to that mud hole where our tent used to be..." Maggie felt something crack inside her, all the fear and despair she'd been holding back flooding out. "What then? I've tried everything. I've begged for work in every town between here and Green River. I've washed clothes until my hands bled. I've sold everything we owned except the clothes on our backs, and it wasn't enough. Nothing's ever enough." She was crying now, something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do in front of the children. But the tears came anyway, hot and unstoppable months of grief and terror finally breaking free. "Every door closes in my face. Every person looks at me and sees a burden, a problem, something to avoid. The good Christian women clutch their pearls and say they'll pray for me. The men..." Her voice broke. "The men offer solutions that aren't solutions at all. And my children get thinner every day, and my daughter is burning up with fever because I couldn't keep her dry, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. I don't know how to save them." Lucy and Hank had gone very quiet. Maggie could feel their eyes on her, could feel their fear at seeing their mother break down. She should stop. She should be strong for them. But she couldn't seem to find the strength anymore. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides. He crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me." His voice was low, intense. "You ain't a burden. You ain't a problem. You're a woman who's been fighting alone for too long, and you're tired, and that's no shame. But you ain't alone tonight. You're in my cabin, and your children are dry and getting fed, and your daughter's fever is breaking. That's not nothing, Maggie. That's everything." She stared at him through her tears, waiting for the catch, the condition, the price. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping us?" Something shifted in his eyes, something old and painful. "Because someone helped my mother once when she had nothing and no one. A stranger saw her struggling and reached out instead of walking by. She always said she could never repay that kindness, said maybe she didn't need to, maybe she just needed to pass it forward someday." He paused. "She died before she got the chance, but I didn't, and I made her a promise that if I ever saw someone who needed help the way she needed help, I wouldn't hesitate." He stood, turned back to the stove. "The broth's almost ready. Get your children fed, Maggie. Get some rest. And tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next, together." Maggie watched him ladle broth into cups, watched him bring them to Lucy and Hank with gentle words and a steady hand. She watched her children drink like they hadn't tasted anything warm in weeks, because they hadn't. And for the first time in 4 months, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear. It wasn't hope. Not yet. Hope was too dangerous, too fragile. But it was close. Later that night, with the children finally asleep, Lucy and Hank curled together on a pallet by the fire. Letty on the bed with her fever breaking. At last, Maggie sat across from Caleb at the small table. "You should sleep," he said. "You look like you haven't in days." "I can't." She wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee he'd made, drawing warmth from it. "Every time I close my eyes, I see all the ways this could go wrong." "It won't. You can't promise that." "No." He met her gaze steadily. "But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure you and those children are safe. Tonight and tomorrow, and as long as you need." "Why?" The question came out again, sharper this time. "What do you want from us, Mr. McAllister, from me?" His jaw tightened. "I want nothing, ma'am. Nothing except to see those young ones with full bellies and a roof over their heads. That's all. I ain't got ulterior motives. I ain't looking for whatever you think I'm looking for." The frustration in his voice was real. So was the hurt. Maggie felt shame wash through her again. This man had saved her children's lives tonight, and she was accusing him of… What? Being kind. I'm sorry. The words came hard. I've learned to expect the worst from people. It keeps me from being surprised when they deliver it. I imagine you've had plenty of cause to learn that lesson. His voice softened. But not everyone's the same, Maggie. Some folks are just trying to do right. Are you one of those folks? He considered the question seriously, like it deserved real thought. I try to be. Don't always succeed, but I try. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The air felt different, less dangerous. Tell me about this ranch, Maggie heard herself say. Sterling Creek. You said you're the foreman. 8 years now. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Josiah Sterling owns it, Goodman Fairman. Getting on in years, though. Been talking about finding someone to take over, pass it on to. And that someone would be you. Maybe? He shrugged. If I can put together enough money for a partnership stake. It's a good spread. Good land, good water, good cattle. Place a man could build a life on. Or a family. The words slipped out before Maggie could stop them. She saw something flicker in Caleb's eyes, surprise maybe, or something deeper. Or a family, he agreed quietly. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Caleb pushed back from the table. You should get some rest. Take the bed with your little one, I'll sleep by the fire. I can't take your bed. You can and you will. His tone brooked no argument. Your daughter needs you close, and I've slept in worse places than my own floor. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Trust me on that. Maggie hesitated, then nodded. She was too tired to fight anymore, too worn down to maintain her guard. Tomorrow she would rebuild her walls. Tomorrow she would figure out how to survive without depending on a stranger's kindness. But tonight, she would let herself rest. She crossed to the bed where Letty lay, touched her daughter's forehead. The fever had broken, just as Caleb said. The little girl's breathing was even now peaceful. Thank you, Maggie whispered without turning around. For everything. For saving us. You saved yourselves, Caleb replied. You just needed a little help getting out of the storm. She lay down beside her daughter, pulled the blanket over them both. Across the room, she heard Caleb settling onto his pallet by the fire, heard his breathing slow. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the firelight dancing on the ceiling. The last thing she felt was something strange and fragile unfurling in her chest. Something that might, against all odds, be hope. Morning came slow and gray through the cabin window. Maggie woke to the sound of her children's voices, hushed but animated, and the smell of something cooking that made her stomach clench with desperate hunger. She sat up too fast. The room spun. Easy, Mama. Lucy was at her side, instantly pressing a cup of water into her hands. Mr. Caleb says you need to drink before you eat. Says your body forgot how to handle food proper. Maggie drank, her eyes scanning the cabin. Hank sat cross-legged by the fire watching Caleb flip something in a skillet with rapt attention. And Letty? Where's Letty? Right here, Mama. Lucy pointed to the foot of the bed where the 3-year-old sat wrapped in a blanket, gnawing on a piece of bread with more energy than Maggie had seen in weeks. Her fever's all gone. Mr. Caleb checked 3 times already. The relief hit Maggie so hard she had to close her eyes against it. Letty was alive. Her baby was alive. You sleep okay? Caleb's voice carried across the small space, casual, like this was normal, like he hadn't saved 4 lives last night. Yes. Maggie found her footing, stood slowly. Better than I have in months. Good. Breakfast is almost ready. Nothing fancy, just eggs and salt pork, but it'll stick to your ribs. He served them at the table, piling plates high with more food than Maggie had seen in one place since leaving Philadelphia. The children ate like wolves, barely pausing to breathe. Maggie forced herself to go slower, knowing her shrunken stomach would rebel if she gorged. After you've eaten, Caleb said, settling across from her with his own plate. "I'm heading to the main ranch house. Need to talk to Mr. Sterling about some things. You're welcome to come along if you want, or you can stay here. Rest. Let the young ones recover." "What kind of things?" He swallowed, met her eyes. "Work things. There might be an opportunity. Nothing certain yet, but worth asking about." Maggie's hand tightened on her fork. "An opportunity for who?" "For you." The words hung there. Maggie felt the old suspicion rise, the familiar armor clicking into place. "I told you last night, Mr. McAllister. I've tried every town between here and Bar Green River. I remember." He set down his fork. "But you ain't tried Sterling Creek. And Song May, she's the housekeeper at the main house. She's been complaining for months about needing help with the mending. Seems the ranch hands are hard on their clothes and she's got too much else to do. You want me to be a seamstress? I want you to have options." His voice was patient, steady. "Honest work for honest pay. A chance to get back on your feet, but only if you want it. I ain't gonna force you into anything." Lucy had stopped eating, watching the exchange with those two old eyes. Hank pretended to focus on his food, but his shoulders were tense, waiting. Maggie thought about the tent, the mud, the slow starvation that had been killing them by inches. "I'll meet this Song May," she said carefully, "but I'm not promising anything." "Fair enough." Caleb nodded like she'd given him exactly what he expected. "We'll ride over after breakfast." The main ranch house appeared through a stand of cottonwoods, and Maggie felt her breath catch. 2 stories of solid timber and stone with glass windows that caught the morning light, and a wraparound porch that spoke of Sunday afternoons and peaceful evenings. It looked like everything she'd ever wanted and stopped believing she could have. "It's big." Hank breathed from his spot in front of Maggie on the horse. "Mr. Sterling built it 30 years ago for his wife," Caleb said. "She passed on about 10 years back. He's rattled around in there alone ever since. No children. None that lived. 3 died young. Fever took 2, accident took the 3rd. His voice carried old sadness. "It's why he's been thinking about the future, about legacy, about what happens to this place when he's gone." Before Maggie could respond, the front door banged open, and a small, fierce-looking woman emerged onto the porch. Chinese, maybe 60, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "You're late," she announced to Caleb. "Mr. Sterling already ate breakfast without you." "Good morning to you too, Song May." "Don't good morning me." Her eyes had already moved past Caleb to Maggie and the children. "This is them, the ones from the tent. This is them." Song May descended the porch steps with surprising speed, circling Maggie like a hawk examining prey. Maggie fought the urge to shield her children, to shrink back from that penetrating gaze. "Too thin," Song May pronounced. "All of you, especially the little one." She pointed at Letty. "She's sick. Fever. It broke last night." Song May's hand shot out, touched Letty's forehead with surprising gentleness. "Still warm, needs rest, needs good food, needs proper care." Her eyes snapped to Maggie. "You the seamstress? Yes, I can sew." Can sew or can sew well. Big difference. Maggie felt her spine stiffen. "I've been sewing since I was 5 years old. My mother was a seamstress in Philadelphia. She taught me everything: mending, darning, embroidery, tailoring. I made my own wedding dress and all 3 of my children's baptism gowns." Something flickered in Song May's expression. Approval, maybe. Or at least the absence of disapproval. "Big words. We see if hands match mouth." She turned back toward the house. "Come, I show you the workroom. Children stay in kitchen. I have food for them. Real food, not whatever scraps you've been surviving on." She was already halfway up the porch steps. Maggie looked at Caleb, who shrugged. "She's like that with everyone. Don't take it personal. She's terrifying. She's the best person I know." He swung down from the horse, helped Maggie and the children dismount. "Go on. I'll check on you later." Inside the house was even more impressive than outside. Clean wooden floors, solid furniture, photographs on the walls of people long gone. Song Mei led the children to a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee, settled them at a table with plates of food that made their eyes go wide. "Eat slow," Song Mei instructed. "Stomach's not used to real meals. Eat too fast, you get sick." She fixed Maggie with a pointed look. "You too. Eat first. Then we see about sewing." "I'm fine. I can work now." "You fall over from hunger, you're no use to anyone." Song Mei pushed a plate toward her. "Eat. Work comes after." So Maggie ate. Properly this time, with actual silverware at an actual table, surrounded by warmth and the sounds of her children filling their bellies. She watched Letty reach for a biscuit with steady hands, watched Lucy carefully cut her meat into small pieces. For Hank, watched her family look almost normal for the first time in months. "Your husband," Song Mei's voice cut through her thoughts. "He died. 4 months ago. Consumption. That's hard. Harder with children." It wasn't sympathy exactly, more like acknowledgement, statement of fact. "The town. They didn't help you." "The town made it very clear I wasn't their problem." Song Mei's expression tightened. "Towns are like that, full of good Christian people who forget what Christ actually taught." She stood abruptly. "Finish eating, then come to workroom. I have pile of mending bigger than you." She swept out, leaving Maggie alone with the children. "I like her," Hank announced through a mouthful of eggs. "She's mean but nice." "Mean but nice." Maggie repeated something almost like a laugh bubbling up in her chest. "That's about right, baby. That's about right." The workroom was everything Maggie had dreamed of during those long months of scraping by. A large table, good light from windows on 2 walls, shelves lined with thread and fabric and buttons. A treadle sewing machine sat against one wall, an actual sewing machine, and baskets overflowed with clothing that needed attention. 3 months of backlog, Song Mei said, gesturing at the baskets. "The old seamstress left to get married. No one since then. Ranch hands destroy clothes faster than I can keep up." Maggie moved to the nearest basket, pulled out a shirt with a torn sleeve. Her fingers found the damage, automatically assessing. "Reinforced seam here would prevent future tears," she murmured. "And this button's sewn on wrong. That's why it keeps coming loose." Song Mei watched her with sharp eyes. "Fix it." Maggie selected thread, found a needle, sat down at the table. Her hands remembered the motions even though her body was weak. In and out, tiny stitches, neat and precise. She replaced the button with proper technique, reinforced the seam, examined her work critically before handing it back. Song Mei inspected every stitch, turned the shirt inside out, tested the button. "Acceptable," she said finally, and from her tone Maggie understood that was high praise. "You start tomorrow, 4 days a week, morning until afternoon, $2 a week plus meals while you work." Maggie's heart stopped. $2 is fair wage. More if you prove worth it. Song Mei paused. "Also, Caleb says you need place to stay. There's a cabin on ranch property, small but solid. Empty since last foreman moved to bunkhouse. You take it. Part of arrangement." "I can't, that's too much. Is practical." Song Mei cut her off. "Cabin needs someone in it. You need somewhere to live. Everyone benefits. Unless you prefer tent in mud." The bluntness of it hit Maggie like cold water. This woman wasn't offering charity. She was offering a transaction, an exchange, a chance to maintain dignity while accepting help. "Why?" The question came out hoarse. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Song Mei was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer. 30 years ago, I came to this country with my husband. He worked in the mines. Died in a collapse when I was 25. No family, no friends, no money." She met Maggie's eyes. "Mr. Sterling found me scrubbing floors in a hotel. Offered me work. Gave me place to live. Never asked for anything except honest labor. She paused. I learned from him. Sometimes helping is just helping. No strings, no tricks. Just one person seeing another person struggle and choosing to reach out instead of walk by. Maggie felt tears burning her eyes. She'd spent so long expecting the worst from everyone, so long building walls against disappointment and betrayal. And now, here were these people, Caleb Song-May, tearing those walls down with nothing more than simple kindness. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you'll take the work in the cabin and give your children chance at real life. Song-May's voice hardened slightly. Or say no and go back to mud. Your choice. But choose fast, I have lunch to prepare. Maggie almost laughed. Almost. Yes, I'll take it, thank you. Good. Song-May nodded once, all business again. Now go tell your children. They look like they're about to burst waiting for news. Maggie found them in the kitchen, 3 anxious faces turning toward her as she entered. Lucy was on her feet instantly. What happened? Did she like your sewing? Are we going to? We're staying. The words felt unreal in Maggie's mouth. Mrs. Song offered me work, and there's a cabin we can live in. A real cabin with walls and a floor, and... She couldn't finish, because Lucy had thrown herself into Maggie's arms, sobbing with a violence that shocked them both. Hank piled on a moment later, and then Letty was reaching for them from her chair, and they all ended up in a heap on the kitchen floor, crying and laughing and holding each other. We're not going back to the tent. Hank's voice was muffled against Maggie's shoulder. No, baby. We're never going back to the tent. And we can eat food, real food like today. Every day. I promise. Caleb found them like that 10 minutes later, still on the floor, still tangled together, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I take it Song-May said yes. Maggie looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. This man who'd ridden out of a storm and changed everything. This stranger who'd kept his promise, asked for nothing, given them back their lives. She said yes. Maggie's voice broke. Caleb, she said yes. Something shifted in his face, something warm and genuine that made Maggie's heart do something strange in her chest. Good, he said simply. That's real good. The cabin was small, 1 room, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, but to Maggie it looked like a palace. Caleb walked them through it that afternoon, pointing out the well 50 yards north, the outhouse behind the cottonwoods, the creek where they could wash. It ain't much, he said, an apology in his voice, but it's dry and solid. The roof don't leak, and the fireplace draws clean. I'll bring over some extra blankets from the bunkhouse, maybe another chair or 2. It's perfect. Maggie ran her hand along the wooden table, feeling the smooth grain beneath her fingers. It's more than perfect. The children were already exploring, opening the chest by the bed, peering up the chimney, testing the shutters on the windows. Their voices echoed off the walls, bright and alive in a way they hadn't been in months. Mama, look! Hank had found something in the chest, a carved wooden horse, small and worn smooth from handling. Can I keep it? That belonged to the previous foreman's boy, Caleb said. He left it behind when they moved. I reckon he'd be happy knowing someone's playing with it again. Hank clutched the horse to his chest like it was made of gold. There's more where that came from, Caleb continued. The ranch hands, they're always whittling something or other. I'm sure they'd be happy to make toys for the young ones if you asked. We can't ask for more, Maggie said quickly. You've already given us too much. I ain't given you anything. Caleb's voice was firm but gentle. You're working for everything you're getting. Honest labor for honest pay. That's not charity, Maggie. That's how it's supposed to work. She wanted to argue. Old habits demanded it. But she was tired, so tired of fighting against kindness, of assuming the worst, of waiting for the catch that never seemed to come. Thank you, she said instead. Just 2 words, but she meant them with everything she had. Caleb nodded, something flickering in his eyes. I'll come by tomorrow evening, check on things. Make sure you're settled in proper. You don't have to. I want to. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then turned toward the door. "Get some rest, Maggie. You've earned it." He left, and Maggie stood in the middle of her new home surrounded by her children, feeling something she'd almost forgotten existed. Safety. Actual safety. That night, with Lucy and Hank curled together on the bed, and Letty tucked against Maggie's side, she lay awake watching firelight dance on the ceiling. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Inside, everything was warm and dry and quiet. She thought about William, about the dreams he'd had for them, the life he'd promised, the way it had all fallen apart. She wondered what he'd think if he could see them now. Not the broken family dying in a tent, but this. A cabin. Work. A chance. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered into the darkness. "But I'm going to save them. I swear to you, William. I'm going to give them the life you wanted for us." Letty stirred against her side, murmured something in her sleep. Maggie pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of clean hair and soap. Actual soap provided by Song May. Tomorrow she would start her new job. Tomorrow she would begin building something real. Tomorrow the hard work would begin, and she'd have to prove herself worthy of the chance she'd been given. But tonight, she let herself rest. The first week passed in a blur of needle and thread. Maggie threw herself into the work with desperate intensity, arriving early, staying late, attacking the mountain of mending like it was a personal enemy. Song May watched her with those sharp eyes, occasionally correcting her technique, more often nodding in silent approval. "You work too hard," Song May said on the third day, setting a cup of tea at Maggie's elbow. "Burning yourself out helps no one. I need to prove I'm worth the chance you've given me." "You already have." Song May sat down across from her. 3 days and pile is half gone. Old seamstress never worked this fast. She paused. "But fast means nothing if you collapse. Pace yourself. The mending will still be here tomorrow." Maggie's hands stilled on the shirt she was repairing. "I keep thinking it's going to disappear. That I'll wake up and be back in that tent and all of this will have been a dream." "Not dream. Real." Song May's voice was matter-of-fact. "Though I understand why you fear. When life takes everything, once you expect it to take everything again." She tapped the table. "But sometimes, life gives back. Not always, not often, but sometimes. Do you believe that?" "I believe in work, in showing up every day doing what needs done. Belief is luxury for people with full bellies and warm beds." Song May stood. "You have full belly now, warm bed. Use them to build something that lasts." The children had settled into their own routines. Lucy helped in the ranch house kitchen, learning from Song May with eager attention. Hank had discovered the chicken coop and appointed himself official egg gatherer, naming each hen and reporting their personalities to anyone who would listen. Letty recovered fully from her fever and spent her days following whoever would let her, chattering constantly in that way of 3-year-olds. And Caleb came by every evening. He always had an excuse, checking the chimney, bringing firewood, making sure the shutters latched properly. But Maggie had stopped believing the excuses days ago. He came because he wanted to see them. Because somehow, in the space of a week, they'd become something he looked forward to. She wasn't sure how to feel about that. "Mama!" Lucy's voice interrupted her thoughts on the 5th evening. Caleb had just left and the children were supposed to be getting ready for bed. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby." Lucy hesitated, twisting her hands in her nightgown. "Do you like Mr. Caleb?" The question hit Maggie like cold water. "He's been very kind to us." "That's not what I asked." Lucy's eyes were too knowing, too old. "Do you like him? Like the way you liked Papa?" Maggie's heart clenched. "Lucy." "I'm not mad, I just want to know." Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking every bit her 9 years. "Because I think he likes you, and I think maybe that scares you. But Mama, it's okay. Papa wouldn't want you to be alone forever." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth Maggie wasn't ready to face. "I don't know what I feel, sweetheart." It was the most honest answer she could give. "Everything's happened so fast. A week ago we were dying in a tent, and now we're not dying anymore." Lucy reached out, took her mother's hand. "And Mr. Caleb is the reason why. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Maggie looked at her daughter. This child who'd grown up too fast, who'd seen too much, who somehow still believed in happy endings. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "That counts for something." On Sunday, Caleb asked if they wanted to come to church. "There's a service in town," he said over breakfast. He'd started joining them for meals, another routine that had slipped into place without anyone quite noticing. Nothing fancy, just the Reverend's monthly circuit. Most of the ranch folks go. "I don't have anything to wear." Maggie gestured at her borrowed clothes. "These aren't exactly church appropriate." "Song May might have something. She's been collecting clothes from the missionary barrel for weeks now. Says they're for anyone who needs them." He gave her a knowing look. "I suspect she had you in mind." So they went. Maggie in a simple dress that almost fit the children in clothes that were clean if not new, riding into Elk Crossing with Caleb like they were a family. Like they belonged together. The thought terrified her. The church was small, whitewashed, filled with ranchers and their wives, with merchants and their children. Maggie felt eyes on her the moment they walked in. Whispers followed them to a pew near the back. "Who's that with Caleb?" "Some widow he found. Living in a tent, if you can believe it. 3 children and no husband. Poor thing." The pity in their voices made Maggie's skin crawl. She'd heard that tone before in Green River, in every town she'd passed through since William died. Poor thing. How sad. Someone should do something. But no one ever did. The service passed in a blur. Maggie couldn't focus on the Reverend's words, too aware of the stares, the whispers, the judgment that hung in the air. When it ended, she wanted nothing more than to flee back to the cabin, back to the safety of isolation. But Caleb had other plans. "Mrs. Patterson." He guided Maggie toward a plump woman in a sensible dress. "This is Maggie Holloway. She's working at Sterling Creek now doing the mending. Maggie, Mrs. Patterson runs the general store with her husband." "Pleased to meet you." The words came out stiff. Mrs. Patterson's eyes swept over Maggie, assessing. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. "You're the one Song May's been talking about. Says you're the best seamstress she's seen in 30 years. Song May talks about me. Song May talks to everyone. Usually complaints, but lately..." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Lately, she's had good things to say. That's rare. She must think highly of you." The conversation shifted to mundane things. Whether ranch business, the price of flour, but Maggie barely heard it. Song May had been talking about her, saying good things. The knowledge settled in her chest like something warm. More introductions followed. The Reverend's wife, who commented on how well-behaved the children were. The blacksmith, who wanted to know if Maggie could repair his coat. A group of women who clustered around Lucy, asking about her schooling, her interests, whether she'd like to join their daughters for a sewing circle. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, something cautious and testing, and Maggie found herself responding in kind. "They're not so bad," Caleb said on the ride home, as if reading her thoughts. "Takes them a while to warm up to strangers, but once they do, they're loyal as anything. I'm not used to people being welcoming." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "The towns you tried before, the ones that turned you away, they weren't all bad people. Most were just scared. Scared of being responsible, scared of getting involved, scared of what it might cost them to help someone who needed it. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it understandable." He glanced at her, something serious in his eyes. "Fear makes cowards of people who might otherwise be brave. You know that as well as anyone." Maggie thought about her own fear, the walls she'd built, the way she'd nearly refused Caleb's help that first night. He was right. Fear had almost cost her everything. I'm trying, she said softly, to be less afraid. I know you are. His voice was warm. And you're doing fine. That night, after the children were asleep, Maggie sat by the fire and thought about Caleb's words, about fear and bravery and the choices people made when faced with someone else's need. She thought about William, who'd been brave enough to chase a dream across the country, even if that dream had killed him. She thought about her children, who'd been brave enough to trust Caleb when their mother couldn't. She thought about herself, about the courage it had taken to keep going when every instinct screamed to give up. Maybe that was what life was in the end. A series of choices between fear and hope, between walls and bridges, between staying safe and reaching out. Caleb had reached out to her when she was drowning. Songmei had reached out when she could have turned away, and slowly, painfully, Maggie was learning to reach back. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was too soon for love, too complicated, too tangled up with gratitude and dependence and the raw wound of William's death. But it was something real, something worth protecting. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Maggie let herself believe it might last. The knock on the cabin door came just after dawn, 3 weeks into their new life. Maggie opened it, expecting Caleb, and found Songmei instead, her face grave. You need to come to the main house, now. What's wrong? Is it Mr. Sterling as Caleb? Just come. Songmei was already walking away. Bring children. They can wait in kitchen. Maggie gathered Lucy and Hank and Letty, dread pooling in her stomach. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way you could feel a storm coming before the first clouds appeared. At the main house, Caleb waited on the porch. His face told her everything she needed to know. What happened? Inside. He held the door for her. Josiah wants to explain himself. The study was smaller than she expected, lined with books and papers, and the accumulated memories of a lifetime. Josiah Sterling sat behind a massive desk, looking every one of his 68 years. And across from him sat a man Maggie had never seen before. Young mid-30s maybe, with slicked back hair, and a suit that cost more than everything Maggie had ever owned. Mrs. Holloway. Josiah's voice was tired. This is my nephew Theodore Sterling. He's come from Boston with a business proposition. Theodore stood, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Holloway. I've heard a great deal about your work here. Maggie didn't take his hand. She was looking at Caleb, at the tension in his jaw, at the barely controlled anger in his eyes. What kind of proposition? She asked. Theodore's smile widened. A very generous one, I assure you. One that will change everything. And in that moment, Maggie felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The safety she'd been building, the future she'd been imagining, all of it, suddenly terrifyingly fragile. Everything was about to change. Theodore Sterling pulled a stack of papers from his leather case and spread them across Josiah's desk like a man laying out a winning hand. His movements were precise, practiced, the gestures of someone who'd done this 100 times before and won every single one. The railroad is expanding westward faster than anyone predicted. He said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. The Montana Pacific wants to run a line through this valley. They're willing to pay handsomely for the right-of-way, and even more handsomely for the land itself. Josiah said nothing. His weathered hands rested flat on the desk, trembling slightly with age. How handsomely? Caleb's voice was controlled, but Maggie could hear the steel beneath it. $40,000. Theodore let the number hang in the air. More than triple what this ranch is worth as a cattle operation. Uncle Josiah could retire in comfort, live out his remaining years in San Francisco or Denver, somewhere with proper doctors and society. He doesn't want San Francisco. Caleb took a step forward. He wants to die on this land, same as Aunt Martha did. You'd know that if you ever bothered to visit. Caleb. Josiah's voice was quiet but firm. Let him finish. Theodore's smile flickered just for an instant. I understand there are sentimental attachments. But sentiment doesn't pay for medicine when your hands shake too badly to sign your own name. It doesn't provide for your people when the cattle market crashes. He glanced at Maggie. Or when you take in every stray that wanders onto your property. The words hit like a slap. Maggie felt her face burn, felt the old shame rising, the familiar sensation of being seen as less than as a burden, as someone else's problem. That's enough. Caleb moved between Theodore and Maggie, his shoulders blocking her view of the man's smug face. Maggie's no stray. She's an employee doing honest work, more than you've ever done. I'm trying to help my uncle. You're trying to sell his life out from under him so you can pocket the profit. Caleb's voice dropped dangerously low. Don't dress it up as concern. Boys. Josiah's hand came down on the desk with more strength than Maggie would have expected. That's enough. Both of you. Silence fell. Maggie could hear her own heart pounding, could feel the tension vibrating in the air like heat before a lightning strike. Josiah turned to his nephew, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 70 years of hard living. Theodore, I appreciate you coming all this way. I know you think you're doing right by me. But this ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's Martha's grave out by the old oak. It's 3 decades of blood and sweat and buried children. It's home. Uncle, I'm not finished. The old man's eyes were sharp, lucid. You want me to sell so you can take your cut and go back to your comfortable life in Boston. I understand that. Money's tight, investments haven't been going your way. But I won't sacrifice everything I've built to bail you out of your own poor decisions. Theodore's smooth facade cracked. I'm not. Don't lie to me, boy. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. Josiah leaned back in his chair. The answer is no. It was no before you got here, and it's no now. This land stays in the family, and it stays as a ranch. Then at least consider the partnership offer differently. Theodore recovered quickly, his voice taking on a new urgency. You're planning to bring Caleb in as a partner. Yes, give him a stake in the operation. He shot Caleb a look of barely concealed contempt. A hired hand with no education, no business experience, no family name worth speaking of. Caleb's been more family to me than you ever were. He's a fortune hunter. Theodore's polish was slipping, desperation showing through. Can't you see that he's been waiting for years for you to die so he can take everything you've built? Caleb moved so fast Maggie barely saw it. One moment he was standing by the window, the next he had Theodore by the collar, hauling him half out of his chair. Say that again. His voice was quiet, deadly. Go on. Say it to my face. Theodore's eyes went wide with genuine fear. Let go of me. Caleb. Maggie heard herself speak, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Let him go. He's not worth it. For a long moment, Caleb didn't move. Then slowly he released Theodore's collar and stepped back. His hands were shaking. Get out. Josiah's voice was ice. Get out of my house, Theodore. You're not welcome here anymore. Theodore straightened his collar with trembling hands. You're making a mistake, Uncle. When you're lying in your bed too weak to move, wishing you'd taken my offer, out. Theodore grabbed his papers, shoved them into his case without order or care. He paused at the door, looking back at Caleb with hatred burning in his eyes. This isn't over, he said. Not by a long shot. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, the front door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Josiah slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. Well, that went about as well as expected. Are you all right? Maggie moved toward him without thinking. Can I get you anything? I'm fine, child, just tired. He waved a hand weakly. Go on, both of you. I need to rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. Outside the study, Song May was waiting with the children. One look at their faces told Maggie they'd heard everything, or at least enough to understand that something bad had happened. Take them back to cabin, Song May said quietly. I'll bring dinner later. Is Mr. Sterling going to be okay? He's strong. Stronger than he looks. Song Mei's eyes moved to Caleb, who stood rigid as a statue staring at nothing. Take him too. He needs to not be alone right now. Maggie nodded. She gathered her children, reached out, and touched Caleb's arm. Come on, walk us home. He blinked, seemed to return from wherever he'd gone. I should stay, in case Theodore... Song Mei will watch over him. You need air. They walked in silence, the children uncharacteristically quiet, sensing the heaviness that hung over the adults. When they reached the cabin, Maggie sent Lucy, Hank, and Letty inside with instructions to start getting ready for supper. Then she turned to Caleb. Talk to me. He shook his head, jaw tight. I almost hit him. But you didn't. Because you stopped me. He finally met her eyes, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. Shame, fear, vulnerability. What he said about me being a fortune hunter waiting for Josiah to die? Maggie, I'd never... I know. Do you? His voice cracked. Because he's not entirely wrong. I have been waiting, not for Josiah to die, but for my chance. For years I've been hoping he'd offer me the partnership, make me part of this place. And now Theodore's here, and he's going to ruin everything, and I don't know how to stop him. His words dissolved into ragged breathing. Maggie reached up without thinking and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. Her voice was firm, the same tone she used with her children when they needed to hear something important. You are not a fortune hunter. You're a good man who's worked hard for everything he has. Josiah sees that. Song Mei sees that. I see that. Maggie. Theodore is desperate and angry, and he'll say anything to get what he wants. Don't let him make you doubt yourself. She held his gaze, willing him to believe her. Don't let him take that from you. Something broke behind his eyes. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her so tight she could barely breathe, and buried his face in her hair. I don't know what I'd do without you, he whispered. I don't know when that happened, but it's true. Somewhere in the last few weeks, you became essential to me, Maggie. You and those children. You're the reason I get up in the morning. You're the reason any of this matters. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, not so soon, not with William barely 4 months dead. But standing here in Caleb's arms, feeling his breath warm against her temple, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was falling for him, had already fallen if she was honest. Caleb, her voice came out rough. The children... I know. He pulled back reluctantly, but kept his hands on her shoulders. I know. It's too soon, too fast, too complicated. But Maggie, I need you to know whatever happens with Theodore, whatever comes next, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you. You can't promise that. Watch me. He kissed her forehead, just her forehead, gentle and chaste, and stepped away. I'll come by tomorrow. We'll figure this out together. All of it. Then he was walking back toward the main house, leaving Maggie standing alone in the fading light, with her heart doing things she didn't know it could still do. The weeks that followed were tense with waiting. Theodore had returned to Elk Crossing, taken a room at the hotel, and made it clear he wasn't leaving until he got what he wanted. He visited the ranch twice more each time with new arguments, new offers, new veiled threats that made Caleb's hands clench into fists. But Josiah held firm. And slowly, life at Sterling Creek settled back into something like normalcy. Maggie threw herself into work, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in her stomach. The mending pile shrank steadily. Song Mei started giving her more complex projects alterations, new garments, items that required real skill. The ranch hands began stopping by the workroom to request specific repairs to complement her stitching, to ask if she could maybe let out a seam here or take in a hem there. She was becoming part of the ranch, part of the community. It terrified her. You're thinking too loud again. Song Mei's voice cut through her concentration. I can hear it from the kitchen. Maggie looked up from the shirt she was repairing. How do you always know? 30 years of watching people. Song Mei sat down across from her, pushing a cup of tea into her hands. You're worried about Theodore, aren't you? Worried, yes. Scared, no. Song Mei shrugged. Mr. Sterling has survived worse than a greedy nephew. He'll survive this too. But what if he doesn't? What if Theodore finds some way to force the sale? Then we adapt. We find new jobs, new homes, new lives. Song Mei's eyes were steady, knowing. You've done it before. You can do it again. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Maggie's stomach clench. I don't want to start over again. The admission came out raw, unplanned. I've been starting over my whole life. I'm tired. I just want to stay somewhere, build something, watch my children grow up without fear. Is that so much to ask? No. Song Mei reached across and took her hand. It's not too much. It's the least of what you deserve. She squeezed gently. And I don't think you'll have to start over. I think Caleb will find a way to fix this. He always does. Why are you so sure? Song Mei smiled, an expression that transformed her severe face into something almost tender. Because now he has something to fight for. The church social was scheduled for the last Saturday of the month, an event that had apparently been planned for weeks, but that Maggie only learned about 3 days beforehand. You're coming, Caleb said, making it a statement rather than a question. All of you. It's important. Important how? Important for the town to see you as part of this community. Important for them to know you belong here. He paused, something uncertain flickering across his face. Important for me. So Maggie went. Song Mei produced another dress from her apparently endless supply of missionary barrel treasures. This one a soft green that made Maggie's eyes look brighter than they had in months. Lucy wore yellow, Hank wore his cleanest shirt, and Letty twirled in a white dress with ruffles that made her giggle with delight. The church hall was packed when they arrived, filled with families Maggie was starting to recognize from her weekly attendance at services. Mrs. Patterson waved from across the room. The blacksmith's wife called out a greeting. Even the Reverend's wife, who'd been politely distant before, came over to compliment Maggie's sewing work. You made that dress yourself, didn't you? She asked, fingering the hem. I can tell by the stitching. It's beautiful work. Thank you, ma'am. I've been meaning to ask, would you consider taking on private commissions? My daughters need new dresses for Christmas, and I'd rather pay a skilled seamstress than buy mail-order trash that falls apart after one wearing. Maggie blinked. Yes. Yes, I'd be happy to. Wonderful. Stop by the parsonage next week, and we'll discuss details. The Reverend's wife squeezed her arm and swept away, leaving Maggie standing speechless. See? Caleb appeared at her elbow, 2 cups of punch in his hands. I told you they'd come around. She wants to pay me, for sewing. You're good at what you do. Word gets around. He handed her a cup, his fingers brushing hers. Dance with me. What? Dance. With me. He gestured toward the cleared space where couples were already moving to the fiddler's tune. I'm asking nicely. Maggie looked at the dancing couples, at her children, watching with wide eyes at the community that was slowly, tentatively accepting her as one of their own. She looked at Caleb, at the hope in his eyes, at the hand he extended toward her. People will talk. Let them. She took his hand. The first dance was awkward, Maggie stumbling over her own feet, too aware of the eyes on them. But Caleb was patient, guiding her through the steps with quiet confidence, and gradually she relaxed into the rhythm. You're actually good at this, she said, surprised. My mother taught me. Said every gentleman should know how to dance. He pulled her slightly closer. Though I don't think she ever imagined me using the skill at a church social in Montana. Where did she imagine you? Boston, probably. Some fancy ballroom with crystal chandeliers and women in silk dresses. He smiled, soft and private. I think I prefer this. The music shifted, slowing into a waltz. Caleb's hand settled more firmly at her waist, and Maggie let herself lean into him, let herself feel the strength of his arms, the steady beat of his heart. Maggie. His voice was low, meant only for her. I need to tell you something. What? I talked to Josiah yesterday about the partnership. He paused, and she felt tension coil in his shoulders. He's agreed to move forward, to sign the papers making me part owner of the ranch. Maggie's heart leaped. Caleb, that's wonderful. There's more. He pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes. The main house comes with the partnership, the house Josiah built for his wife. He wants me to have it to fill it with a family of my own. The implication hung between them, heavy and unmistakable. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to live in that house alone. His voice was rough now, stripped of pretense. I'm saying that when I think about the future, when I imagine what that place could be, you're there. You and Lucy, and Hank, and Letty. That's the picture in my head. That's what I want. Maggie's breath caught. Caleb, I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving William. I know there are 100 reasons why this is crazy. He tightened his grip on her waist. But I also know that I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night when you pointed a gun at my chest and told me you'd kill me if I tried anything. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The music swirled around them, other couples moving past in a blur of color and sound. But for Maggie, there was only this moment, this man, this impossible confession that changed everything. I can't... Her voice broke. I can't give you an answer tonight. I'm not asking for one. He lifted her hand, pressed his lips to her knuckles. I'm just telling you where I stand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. The song ended. They stood still for a moment, suspended in the space between what was and what might be. Then Caleb released her, stepped back, and the world rushed in again. I should check on the children, Maggie heard herself say. Of course. His voice was gentle. Go. I'll be here. She found Lucy by the food table, surrounded by girls her age, laughing at something one of them had said. Hank was playing some kind of chasing game with a group of boys, his face flushed with joy. Letty had fallen asleep in Mrs. Patterson's lap, the older woman rocking her gently while chatting with friends. Her children looked happy, healthy, normal. They looked like children who belonged somewhere. Maggie's eyes burned. She turned away, pushed through the crowd toward the door, desperate for air that didn't feel so thick with emotion and possibility and fear. Outside, the night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled sugar. Maggie pressed her back against the church wall and tried to breathe. She thought about William, about the life they'd planned, the dreams they'd shared, the future that had died with him in that boarding house in Green River. She thought about the grief she still carried, the guilt that surfaced sometimes when she laughed too loud or forgot to be sad. She thought about Caleb, about his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her children like they were treasures worth protecting, about the home he was offering, the life he was proposing, the love he'd just confessed. She thought about fear and hope and the terrifying possibility that she might actually get to keep something good for once in her life. The door opened behind her. She expected Caleb, but it was Lucy who emerged, her face pinched with concern. Mama, are you okay? I'm fine, baby. Just needed some air. Lucy came to stand beside her thin shoulder, pressing against Maggie's arm. Mr. Caleb looks worried. He keeps watching the door. Does he? Mama. Lucy's voice dropped, becoming serious in that way that always made Maggie's heart ache. Do you love him? The question hung in the cool night air. I think I might, Maggie whispered. And that scares me. Why? Because the last time I loved someone, I lost him. And I don't know if I can survive that again. Lucy was quiet for a long moment. Then she slipped her hand into Maggie's and squeezed. Papa wouldn't want you to be scared forever, she said softly. He'd want you to be happy. He'd want us to have a real home, a real family. How do you know? Because he told me. Lucy's voice trembled. Before he died. He made me promise to take care of you and the little ones. And he said if someone good came along, someone who could make you smile again, I should tell you it was okay. That he'd understand. Maggie's tears spilled over, then hot and unstoppable. She pulled Lucy close, held her tight, this child who'd carried such a heavy burden without ever complaining. When did you grow up so much? She managed. I had a good teacher. They stood there together, mother and daughter, until Maggie's tears slowed and her breathing steadied. Then Lucy tugged on her hand. Come back inside. Mr. Caleb's waiting. And I think... She hesitated. I think he's the one, Mama. I think he's the good one Papa was talking about. Maggie looked at her daughter, at the certainty in those two old eyes, and something shifted in her chest. Not a decision, not quite, but the beginning of one. Let's go find out, she said. They went back inside together. Caleb was exactly where he'd said he'd be, watching the door with an expression of barely concealed anxiety. When he saw them, relief flooded his face. Everything all right? Everything's fine. Maggie took a breath. Better than fine. Does that mean? It means I'm not ready to give you an answer yet. She reached out, took his hand. But I'm ready to stop being so scared. I'm ready to let myself hope. Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. That's enough. That's more than enough. The fiddler struck up a new tune. Someone called for everyone to join hands for a group dance. And Maggie found herself swept into the whirl of it, surrounded by people who were becoming friends, holding the hand of a man who might become something more. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself feel joy without waiting for it to be taken away. It was nearly midnight when they finally headed home. The children drowsy and content, Caleb riding beside the wagon he'd borrowed to carry them all. The stars overhead seemed brighter than usual, the air sweeter, the world full of possibility. Tonight was good, Maggie said softly, not wanting to wake the sleeping children. It was. Caleb's voice was warm in the darkness. You looked happy. I felt happy. She paused. I'd forgotten what that was like. They rode in comfortable silence until the cabin came into view. Caleb helped carry the children inside, settling each one into bed with a gentleness that made Maggie's throat tight. At the door he paused. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for asking. He lifted her hand, pressed another kiss to her knuckles. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll start figuring out what comes next. Together. Together. He walked into the darkness, and Maggie stood in her doorway watching him go. The night was quiet around her, peaceful in a way she'd almost forgotten existed. She closed the door, checked on her sleeping children, and lay down in her bed. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make, fears to face, a future to build. Tomorrow, Theodore would still be scheming, and Josiah would still be fragile, and everything would still be uncertain. But tonight, Maggie let herself dream of a house with 5 bedrooms, and a man who loved her, and children who finally had a home. Tonight, she let herself believe it might actually come true. The peace shattered 3 days later. Maggie was in the workroom when she heard the shouting. Caleb's voice raised in fury, Theodore's cold and triumphant. And beneath them both, Josiah's weak, broken, defeated. She dropped her needle and ran. The study door stood open. Inside, Caleb had Theodore pinned against the bookshelf, his forearm pressed against the younger man's throat. Song May stood frozen by the desk, her face ashen. And Josiah sat slumped in his chair, a piece of paper clutched in his trembling hands. What happened? Maggie's voice cut through the chaos. What's going on? Tell her. Caleb pressed harder against Theodore's throat. Go on. Tell her what you did. Theodore's face was turning red, but he managed a strangled laugh. I did what needed to be done. I protected my family's interests. You forged his signature. Caleb's voice shook with rage. You waited until he was asleep and you forged documents selling the ranch to the railroad. Maggie's blood went cold. That's not possible. That can't be legal. It's not. Song May finally moved, crossing to stand beside Josiah. But by the time lawyers sort it out, railroad will already be here, already tearing up land, making it worthless for cattle. Her voice cracked. He's been planning this for weeks, had documents prepared before he even arrived. The sale goes through tomorrow. Theodore wheezed against Caleb's arm. Nothing you can do to stop it. The railroad's already paid. Money's in the bank. Try to reverse it, and you'll be fighting in court for years while they build their tracks right through your precious pastures. Caleb's arm pressed harder. Theodore's face shifted from red to purple. Caleb. Maggie moved toward them. Caleb, stop. You'll kill him. Maybe that's what he deserves. Maybe. But it won't save the ranch. She put her hand on his arm, felt the muscles rigid beneath her touch. Let him go. We'll find another way. For a terrible moment she thought he wouldn't listen. Then slowly he released Theodore, stepping back with his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Theodore sagged against the bookshelf, gasping for air. You're all going to regret this, he rasped. Every single one of you. When the railroad comes through, they'll tear down everything. The house, the barn, all of it. And you'll have nowhere to go. Get out. Josiah's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Get out of my house, and don't ever come back. It's not your house anymore, Uncle. Not legally. Caleb moved again, and this time Maggie couldn't stop him. His fist connected with Theodore's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. The younger man crumpled unconscious before he hit the floor. Someone needed to do that. Caleb shook out his hand, wincing. Song May, can you get the sheriff? I want this man arrested for fraud. Sheriff won't help. Song May's voice was flat. Theodore paid him off first thing. Why do you think no one's investigated the forged documents? The words hit like a physical blow. Maggie felt her knees weaken, the familiar sensation of the ground crumbling beneath her feet. It was happening again, just like before, just like always. Everything she'd built, everything she'd dared to hope for, no. The word came out of her mouth before she realized she was speaking. Everyone turned to look at her. No, she said again, stronger this time. I'm not doing this again. I'm not watching everything fall apart and doing nothing. Maggie, Caleb started. There has to be something, some way to fight this. She crossed to Josiah, knelt beside his chair. Mr. Sterling, the documents Theodore forged, do you still have them? The old man's hands shook as he held out the papers. Maggie took them, scanned them quickly. Her heart was pounding. Her mind racing through every legal proceeding she'd ever witnessed, every document she'd ever seen her father handle back in Philadelphia. This signature. She pointed at the bottom of the page. It's dated 3 days ago, correct? Josiah nodded weakly. And 3 days ago, where were you? In bed. Been sick all week. Theodore's been bringing me meals, keeping everyone away. Said I needed rest. So you have witnesses who can confirm you never left your room, never sat at a desk, never held a pen. Song May's eyes widened with understanding. I brought medicine every 4 hours. He couldn't even sit up, much less sign papers. And the ranch hands? Maggie turned to Caleb. Did any of them see Mr. Sterling during that time? No. Theodore kept everyone away, said Josiah was too sick for visitors. Then we have testimony that contradicts the documents. Maggie felt something fierce rising in her chest, something she'd thought was dead and buried. Theodore claims Josiah signed these papers 3 days ago, but multiple witnesses can testify that Josiah was bedridden and unable to write. That's not just fraud, that's provable fraud. The sheriff won't listen, Song May repeated. Then we go over the sheriff's head. Maggie stood, her spine straightening. There's a federal marshal's office in Helena. Telegraph them today, explain the situation. Forging documents to defraud an elderly man out of his property isn't just a local crime. It's federal mail fraud if any of those papers went through the Postal Service. Caleb stared at her like he'd never seen her before. "How do you know all this?" "My father was a printer in Philadelphia. He handled legal documents for half the lawyers in the city. I grew up watching men try to cheat each other with paper and ink." She held up Theodore's forged signature. "And I learned how to spot a forgery before I was 12 years old." Hope flickered in Josiah's eyes. "You really think we can stop this?" "I think we have to try." Maggie looked around the room at these people who'd become her family. "Theodore's counting on us giving up accepting defeat, letting him win without a fight." "Well, I'm done giving up. I'm done accepting defeat." She turned to Caleb, saw the same fire building in his eyes. "Send that telegraph. Get statements from everyone who saw Mr. Sterling during the past week. Document everything. And Theodore." They both looked at the unconscious man on the floor. "Lock him in the root cellar," Maggie said grimly. "We'll let the federal marshal decide what to do with him." The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. Caleb rode to Helena himself, refusing to trust the telegraph office in Elk Crossing. Song May gathered statements from every ranch hand, every servant, anyone who could testify to Josiah's condition during the time the forged documents were supposedly signed. And Maggie worked. She examined every piece of paper Theodore had produced, comparing signatures, analyzing ink, documenting inconsistencies. Years of watching her father had taught her more than she'd realized, and now that knowledge poured out in a flood of legal arguments and evidence. "You're amazing," Caleb said it on the second night watching her work by lamplight while the children slept. "Do you know that you're absolutely amazing?" "I'm desperate." Maggie didn't look up from her papers. "There's a difference." "No, there isn't. Desperate people give up. You're fighting." He moved closer, stood behind her chair. "Maggie, whatever happens with all this, whatever happens with the ranch, I need you to know something." She finally looked up. He was exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, dust still coating his clothes from the long ride to Helena. But beneath the weariness, something else burned. "I love you." He said it simply, directly, the way he said everything. "I know the timing's terrible. I know everything's falling apart around us, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Maggie's hands stilled on the papers. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Caleb, I'm not asking for an answer. Not tonight. I just needed you to know." He leaned down, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He walked out before she could respond, leaving her alone with the papers and her racing thoughts and a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. The federal marshal arrived on the fourth day. His name was Harrison Cole, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their evidence without expression, examined the forged documents, interviewed Josiah and Song May, and every ranch hand who had a statement to give. Then he went to the root cellar. Theodore had spent 4 days in darkness, and it had stripped away every pretense of civility. He cursed and threatened and promised retribution. He claimed his rights were being violated, demanded a lawyer, swore he'd see them all hanged. Marshal Cole listened to all of it with the same expressionless patience. Then he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Theodore Sterling, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent." "You can't do this." Theodore struggled against the cuffs. "My family has connections. Important people in Boston. They'll destroy all of you." "They're welcome to try." Marshal Cole hauled him toward the door. "Judge Hawkins will see you in Helena. He's not known for being sympathetic to confidence men." As Theodore was dragged past Maggie, he stopped, struggling long enough to spit at her feet. "This is your fault." His voice dripped with hatred. "You should have stayed in that tent where you belonged. You should have died in the mud like the trash you are." Caleb moved, but Maggie stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Maybe I should have." She met Theodore's eyes without flinching. "But I didn't. And now you're going to prison while I'm staying right here building a life you tried to destroy." She smiled cold and fierce. "Enjoy, Helena, Mr. Sterling. I hear the winters are brutal." The marshal hauled Theodore away, his curses fading as they disappeared down the road. And then it was over. The ranch was saved. Maggie felt her knees buckle. Caleb caught her before she could fall, held her up with strong arms that trembled with exhaustion and relief. "You did it." His voice was rough. "Maggie, you saved everything. We did it. All of us. No." He pulled back, cupped her face in his hands. You were the one who wouldn't give up. You were the one who found the solution when the rest of us were ready to surrender. I couldn't lose this." The words came out, broken tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't lose you. Not after everything. Not when I finally found—" She couldn't finish. But she didn't need to. Caleb kissed her. Not on the forehead, not on the hand. A real kiss, desperate and tender, and full of everything they'd both been afraid to say. Maggie kissed him back with all the hope and fear and love that had been building for weeks. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me." The words came out rough, urgent. "I know I said I wouldn't ask for an answer, but I can't wait anymore. Marry me, Maggie. Be my wife. Let me be a father to your children. Let us build a life together." Maggie looked into his eyes, saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for, reflected there. She thought about William, about loss, about the fear that had ruled her life for so long. Then she thought about Lucy's words at the church social, about Papa wanting her to be happy, about good men and second chances and the courage it took to reach for them. Yes. The word came out steady, certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy broke across Caleb's face like sunrise. He lifted her off her feet, spun her around, laughing with a freedom she'd never heard from him before. She said yes. He shouted it to the empty yard, to the sky, to anyone who might be listening. She said yes. From the main house, Maggie heard Song May's voice. "Finally, I thought you two would never figure it out." And then the children were running toward them, Lucy and Hank and Letty having heard the commotion and escaped whatever supervision they'd been under. They piled into the embrace, all 5 of them, tangled together, laughing and crying, and holding on tight. "Does this mean Mr. Caleb's going to be our papa?" Hank asked, his face pressed against Caleb's chest. "If you want me to be." Caleb's voice was thick with emotion. "If you'll have me." "We want you." Lucy spoke for all of them, her eyes shining. "We've wanted you from the beginning." Letty, not entirely understanding what was happening, but catching the joy, threw her arms around Caleb's neck. "Papa," she said firmly, trying out the word. "Papa Caleb." Maggie watched her children embrace the man who would be their father and felt something heal inside her. Not the grief for William that would always be there, a tender scar she'd carry forever, but the fear, the constant, exhausting fear that had driven her for so long. It was gone. In its place was something new, something stronger. Hope, real hope, built on solid ground, and real love, and the knowledge that she didn't have to face the future alone. That evening, Josiah called them into his study. He looked better than he had in days. Some color returned to his cheeks. Some strength returned to his voice. "I've made a decision." He shuffled through papers on his desk with hands that barely trembled. "Given recent events, I think it's time to finalize the partnership arrangement. Caleb, you'll own 40% of Sterling Creek Ranch effective immediately." Caleb's breath caught. "Josiah?" "I'm not finished." The old man held up a hand. "The main house goes to you as well. It's too big for an old man alone, and it needs a family in it. Martha would have wanted that." His eyes moved to Maggie. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said the house needed children's laughter." "I don't know what to say." Caleb's voice cracked. "After everything, Theodore was never family, not really." Josiah's voice hardened. "Family doesn't betray. Family doesn't scheme. Family shows up when things are hard and fights for what matters. He looked at Maggie at the children pressed against her sides. That's what you've all done. That's what family does. Song May appeared in the doorway. Papers are ready. Need witnesses. The signing was simple, almost anticlimactic after everything they'd been through. Caleb's hand shook slightly as he wrote his name. Josiah's signature was weak but legible. And when it was done, Sterling Creek Ranch had a new partner. One more thing. Josiah pulled out another document. Maggie, I'd like you to continue as our seamstress, but I'm also adding you to the household accounts. Whatever you need for yourself or the children you draw on ranch funds. I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not charity. Josiah's voice was firm. It's family, and family takes care of each other. He smiled, the first real smile Maggie had seen from him. Besides, you saved this ranch. Without your quick thinking, Theodore would have won. Consider it a finder's fee. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Maggie stood on the porch of the cabin that had been her home for 2 months. Tomorrow they would start moving to the main house. Tomorrow she would begin planning a wedding. Tomorrow everything would change again. But for now, she stood in the darkness and let herself feel the magnitude of what had happened. 3 months ago, she had been dying in a tent, watching her children starve, certain that nothing would ever be right again. Now she had a home, a family, a future. Footsteps approached. Caleb's arms wrapped around her from behind, warm and solid and real. What are you thinking? His voice was soft against her ear. I'm thinking about how much can change in a few months. She leaned back into his embrace. I'm thinking about how scared I was that night you found us. How certain I was that you were just another person who would hurt us. And now I know I was wrong. She turned in his arms, looked up at his face. Now I know that sometimes life sends you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it. Even if you're too scared to recognize it at first. I was scared too. He admitted it quietly. Scared that I'd mess up, that I'd push too hard, that you'd take the children and leave before I could show you who I really am. I know who you are. Maggie reached up, touched his face. You're the man who rode out of a storm and saved my family. You're the man who gave us shelter and work and dignity when everyone else looked the other way. You're the man I love. She'd said it. Finally, after all the fear and hesitation and uncertainty, she'd said it out loud. Caleb's eyes went bright with tears. Say it again. I love you, Caleb McAllister. I love you with everything I have. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Maggie let herself sink into it completely. The fear was gone. The walls were down. There was only this moment, this man, this love that had grown from the most desperate of circumstances into something beautiful and real and lasting. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead against hers. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you happy. His voice was a promise. I'm going to give those children everything they deserve. I'm going to build something with you that lasts. I know you will. Maggie smiled through her tears. I know. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other, while the stars wheeled overhead and the future stretched out before them like an open road. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was enough. The wedding preparations consumed the next 2 weeks like wildfire. Song May took complete control, barking orders at ranch hands, dispatching riders to town for supplies, transforming the main house into something Maggie barely recognized. Every time she tried to help the older woman shoot her away with sharp words about brides needing rest. You've worked hard enough, Song May declared on the 3rd day. Now you let others work for you. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. Song May pressed a cup of tea into her hands. This is what family does. We carry each other. You've carried those children alone for months. Now let us carry you. The dress came together piece by piece under Song May's skilled hands. with Maggie allowed only to watch and occasionally offer opinions that were promptly overruled. Ivory silk, simple lines, pearl buttons down the back that Lucy insisted on counting every single day. 47, she announced for the 100th time. Mama, that's a lucky number. Is it? It is now. Because it's on your wedding dress. The logic was circular, but somehow perfect. Caleb she barely saw. Some tradition about grooms and brides enforced with iron determination by Song May. But evidence of him appeared everywhere. Wildflowers on her doorstep each morning. Notes tucked under her pillow at night. Small gestures that made her heart ache with love she'd stopped believing she could feel. 3 nights before the wedding, Maggie couldn't sleep. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the children, and walked to the main house porch. The Montana sky stretched overhead, vast and star-scattered, and she stood there breathing in the cold air and trying to believe this was real. Can't sleep either. She turned. Josiah sat in a rocker near the door, wrapped in blankets, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. "Mr. Sterling, you should be inside. It's too cold." "I've survived worse cold than this." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit with an old man for a minute." She sat. The silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than awkward. "Martha and I got married in December too," Josiah said finally. 43 years ago, coldest winter anyone could remember. She wore her mother's dress and looked like an angel. "You must miss her." "Every day, every single day for 10 years. His voice cracked slightly. "But you know what I've learned. Missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. It means you carry them with you while you keep going." Maggie thought about William. About the grief she still carried, the guilt that surfaced when she laughed too loud or forgot to be sad. "Does it ever feel like betrayal?" she asked quietly. "Being happy when they're gone." Josiah was silent for a long moment. "Martha made me promise something before she died. Made me swear I wouldn't close off my heart just because she was leaving it. She said love isn't a finite thing. Giving it to new people doesn't take it away from the ones who came before. That's beautiful. That's Martha." His voice softened. "She would have liked you, Maggie. She would have loved those children. And she would have been the first one planning this wedding, probably driving Song May crazy in the process." Maggie smiled despite herself. "I wish I could have known her." "You do know her. Through this ranch, through the people she helped build it with, through Caleb, who she would have adopted in a heartbeat if she'd had the chance." Josiah reached over and patted her hand. "And through you now. You're part of her legacy, too." The night before the wedding, Maggie dreamed of William. He stood in a field of wildflowers, smiling the way he used to smile before illness hollowed out his face. He didn't speak. Dreams were strange that way, but his message was clear in the warmth of his eyes, the gentle nod he gave her. "Go on. Be happy. This is what I wanted for you." She woke with tears on her cheeks and peace in her heart. Lucy was already awake, watching her with those 2 old eyes. Bad dream. Good dream. Maggie wiped her face. "The best kind." "Was it Papa?" "How did you know?" "Because I dreamed about him too." Lucy crawled into bed beside her. "He said he's proud of us. He said we did good." Maggie pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "We did, baby. We really did." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the kind of December day that made breath visible and cheeks rosy. Song May appeared at first light with an army of helpers, transforming Maggie from exhausted mother into something she barely recognized. "Don't fidget," Song May ordered, wielding hairpins like weapons. "Beauty requires stillness." "I'm not beautiful." "Today you are. Today you're the most beautiful woman in Montana." Song May's voice softened unexpectedly. "And every day after to the man who loves you." The dress fit perfectly. The pearl buttons gleamed. Lucy had woven wildflowers into a crown for Maggie's hair, and when she finally looked in the mirror, she saw someone she'd forgotten existed. A woman with hope in her eyes. A woman who believed in happy endings. "Mama!" Hank appeared in the doorway dressed in his Sunday best, eyes wide. "You look like a princess." "Do I? Better than a princess?" His voice was fierce with certainty. "You look like a mama who's gonna be happy forever." The church was packed when they arrived. Ranchers and townspeople, merchants and their wives, everyone who'd watched Maggie's transformation over the past months. She heard whispers as she entered, beautiful, lovely. "Can you believe it's the same woman?" But they didn't sting anymore. They felt like acknowledgement, like welcome. Caleb waited at the altar with Josiah at his side, both men looking simultaneously nervous and proud. When Caleb saw her, his face transformed. Such love in his eyes, such certainty, such absolute joy that Maggie felt her own eyes blur with tears. Lucy walked ahead, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than precision. Hank followed, clutching the ring box like his life depended on it. And Letty, wearing the white dress with ruffles that made her giggle, toddled alongside with her fist wrapped around Maggie's skirt. The walk up the aisle felt endless and instant. Maggie was aware of faces turning, of whispered compliments, of Mrs. Patterson dabbing her eyes. But mostly she was aware of Caleb, of the way he watched her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. When she reached him, he took her hands. They were shaking, she realized. This strong, capable man who'd faced down storms and scheming nephews was trembling. "You came," he whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought maybe I'd wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It's not a dream." She squeezed his hands. "It's real. We're real." The Reverend began the ceremony words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Maggie heard them through a haze of emotion, her entire being focused on the man in front of her. "Do you, Caleb James McAllister, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt, just absolute certainty. "And do you, Margaret Rose Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Maggie looked into Caleb's eyes and saw the future. A home, a family, children growing up safe and loved, a life built on trust and hope and the hard-won knowledge that second chances existed. "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb kissed her before the Reverend finished speaking, and the church erupted in cheers. Lucy was crying. Hank was whooping. Letty was running in circles screaming, "Mama kissed Papa," at the top of her lungs. Chaos. Perfect, beautiful chaos. The reception spilled out of the church hall and into the street. Food appeared in endless waves contributed by every family in town, and the fiddler played until his fingers ached. Maggie danced until her feet hurt, passed from partner to partner, laughing with a freedom she'd forgotten she possessed. "Mrs. McAllister." Caleb appeared at her elbow, grinning. "May I have this dance?" "Mrs. McAllister." She tested the name. "That sounds strange." "It sounds perfect." He pulled her close. "It sounds like home." They swayed together while the music played, surrounded by community, by family, by all the people who'd become part of their story. And Maggie let herself feel it fully. The joy, the gratitude, the overwhelming sense that everything she'd suffered had led to this moment. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you more." "That's not possible." "Watch me prove it." He tipped her chin up, kissed her softly. "Every day for the rest of our lives." That night, after the celebration ended, and the children had been tucked into their beds in the main house, Maggie stood at the window of her new bedroom and looked out at the land that was now hers. Caleb's arms came around her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about that first night, when you found us in the storm. I remember. I pointed a gun at you. I told you I'd kill you if you tried anything. I remember that too. His laugh rumbled against her back. I'd never been so scared and so determined at the same time. Why determined? Because I saw those children. Saw you. His arms tightened. And I knew I couldn't just ride away. Knew I'd never forgive myself if I didn't at least try to help. You did more than help. Maggie turned in his arms. You saved us. You gave us everything. You saved yourselves. I just provided the roof. Don't do that. Her voice sharpened. Don't minimize what you did. Song May told me about your mother, about the promise you made her. You didn't help us because it was convenient. You helped us because you're a good man, Caleb McAllister, the best man I've ever known. His eyes went bright. Maggie, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how grateful I am. How loved you are. How much you mean to me and to those children. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she kissed him back with everything she had. 3 months passed. Spring touched the Montana hills with green, and the ranch came alive with new growth. Calves were born, crops were planted, and the land that had seemed so harsh in winter revealed its gentler face. Maggie settled into her new life with surprising ease. The main house felt like home, now filled with the sounds of children laughing and doors slamming, and Letty's constant chatter. She continued her sewing work, but on her own terms, in a proper workroom, with good light and all the supplies she could want. The children thrived. Lucy attended school in town, coming home each day with stories and homework, and friends she'd made. Hank spent every spare moment with the horses, developing a reputation as the best young horseman in the county. And Letty, finally free from the fear of hunger, blossomed into a child who laughed easily and loved completely. One morning in late April, Maggie woke feeling strange. Not sick exactly, but off. Different. She'd felt this before, 3 times before. She said nothing to anyone, wanting to be certain. But Song May noticed, of course Song May noticed, and cornered her in the kitchen a week later. How long? Maggie didn't pretend to misunderstand. I'm not sure yet. Maybe 2 months. I knew it. Song May's severe face cracked into something almost resembling joy. I knew when you stopped drinking coffee. When you turned green at the bacon. You can't tell Caleb. Not until I'm sure. I tell no one secrets. Song May squeezed her hand. But you should tell him soon. That man deserves to know he's going to be a father. Maggie told him that evening after the children were asleep. They sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill, watching stars emerge. Caleb had been talking about plans for the summer, about expanding the cattle operation, about building a proper schoolhouse on ranch property. I have something to tell you. Maggie's voice shook slightly. He turned immediately, concern flooding his face. What's wrong? Are you sick? Is it the children? Nothing's wrong. She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. Everything's right. Everything's perfect. She watched understanding dawn. Watched his eyes go wide, his mouth fall open, his entire body go still. We're September, if I'm counting right. Maggie. Her name came out, broken, reverent. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He pulled her into his arms so tight she could barely breathe, and she felt his tears hot against her neck. This strong man who'd faced down everything life threw at him, crying because she was carrying his child. I never thought, his voice broke. I'd given up hoping for this, for a family of my own. And then you came along and those 3 amazing children, and now there'll be 4. 4. He pulled back, cupped her face in his hands. I love you. I love you so much it scares me. Don't be scared. She kissed his tears away. Be happy. We've earned this. The pregnancy was announced at breakfast the next morning. Lucy shrieked with joy. Hank demanded to know if it would be a boy or a girl. Letty, not entirely understanding, simply cheered because everyone else was cheering. I hope it's a girl, Lucy declared. I already have a brother. I need a sister. I hope it's a boy, Hank countered. Then I'll have someone to play with. "What do you hope for?" Caleb asked Maggie. "I hope it's healthy. I hope it's loved. I hope it grows up knowing how wanted it was." "It will." Caleb's hand found hers under the table. "It already does." The months that followed were the happiest of Maggie's life. Her body changed, rounded, grew heavy with new life. Caleb treated her like she was made of glass, constantly hovering, constantly worried, until she finally snapped at him to stop being ridiculous. "I've done this 3 times before. I know what I'm doing." "I know you do. I just—" He ran a hand through his hair. "I want to be there. I want to help. I don't know how to do that." "You help by being here, by loving me, by not treating me like I'm going to break." He tried. He really did. But she still caught him watching her with that worried expression, still found him asking Song Mei for reports on how she was feeling. It was annoying. It was also the sweetest thing anyone had ever done for her. In August, a letter arrived from Boston. Theodore Sterling had been convicted of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. He'd been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge had added extra time because of the particularly cruel nature of his crimes against his elderly uncle. "Good riddance," Song Mei declared when she heard the news. "Amen," Josiah agreed. Caleb said nothing, just pulled Maggie close and held her tight. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "It's been over since you stopped him." His voice was fierce. "Since you found the evidence and saved this ranch. Theodore was finished the moment you decided to fight." September arrived with golden light and cooling temperatures. Maggie's belly had grown enormous, and she waddled more than walked, but she refused to stop working entirely. There were still shirts to mend, still children to raise, still a life to live. The baby came on a Tuesday afternoon with Song Mei barking orders and Caleb pacing the hallway like a caged animal. It was faster than Maggie expected, easier than she remembered, and when she finally held her son in her arms, she wept with a joy so profound it felt like pain. "He's beautiful," Caleb breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Maggie, he's perfect. He looks like you. He looks like a miracle." They named him William, after the man who'd given Maggie her first 3 children. Caleb had suggested it months ago, and Maggie had wept then too. "You're sure?" she'd asked. "He was part of your story, part of what made you who you are. Our son should know that, should understand that love doesn't have to be one thing or the other." So William he was, William Josiah McAllister, a name that honored the past while embracing the future. The children fell in love with their new brother instantly. Lucy appointed herself chief caretaker, learning to change diapers and warm bottles with frightening efficiency. Hank declared that William would be riding horses by the time he could walk, and Letty simply held him, constantly cooing nonsense words that somehow made the baby smile. "We did this," Maggie said to Caleb one night, watching their children sleep. "We built this family." "We did." His arm tightened around her. "Against all odds, against everything that tried to stop us. I'm glad you didn't ride past that tent. I'm glad you didn't shoot me when I stopped." She laughed, and the sound felt like freedom. 5 years later, on an anniversary that had become tradition, Maggie walked to the small cemetery on the edge of the ranch property. William's grave was there now, his real grave, not the unmarked pauper's plot in Green River where he'd originally been buried. Caleb had arranged to have him moved, had paid for a proper headstone, had given Maggie a place to visit when she needed to remember. She knelt in the grass, touched the cool stone. "I brought flowers," she said quietly. "Wild ones like you always liked." She placed them at the base of the marker and sat back on her heels. "The children are doing well. Lucy's almost grown now, 15, and already talking about becoming a teacher. Hank's the best horseman in the county. Letty's learning to cook from Song Mei, though I'm not sure the kitchen will survive. And William, your namesake, he's 5 years old and has your smile. I see it every time he laughs." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were gentle tears, healing tears. "I'm happy, William, truly happy. I know that's what you wanted for me, for all of us, and I need you to know I'll always love you. I'll always be grateful for the life you gave me, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard." She touched the stone once more and stood. Caleb was waiting by the gate, giving her space, giving her time. When she reached him, he opened his arms and she walked into them. "You okay?" "Better than okay." She looked up at his face, this man she'd built a life with. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand. The children's voices carried across the yard, Lucy scolding Hank about something Letty, laughing little William's high-pitched shrieks of joy. Home. This was home. Not the building, though, that mattered. Not the land, though, that mattered too. Home was these people. This love. This family she'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for. "Mama." William came running toward her on chubby legs, arms outstretched. "Mama, look what I found." He thrust a fistful of wildflowers at her, purple and yellow and white, already wilting in his sweaty grip. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. For you." He beamed up at her. "Because you're the best mama in the whole world." Maggie gathered him into her arms, pressed her face against his hair, and let herself feel the magnitude of what she had. 6 years ago, she'd been dying in a tent with 3 starving children, certain that nothing good would ever happen again. Now she stood on the porch of a house that was hers, surrounded by children who were healthy and happy and safe, married to a man who loved her beyond reason. She'd survived the storm. Not just the one that brought Caleb into her life, but all of them, the grief, the hunger, the desperation, the fear. She'd survived, and she'd built something beautiful from the wreckage. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Maggie found Caleb on the porch swing, where they'd shared so many moments. She settled beside him, let his arm come around her shoulders, and watched the stars emerge. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how much can change, how different life looks from where I started." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." She turned to face him. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He kissed her forehead. "Every moment with you has been worth everything it took to get here. Even the part where I pointed a gun at you. Especially that part." His laugh rumbled through her. "I knew then you were someone worth fighting for. And now I know I was right." They sat together as the night deepened, 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built a life from nothing but hope and hard work and the stubborn refusal to give up. Maggie thought about the woman she'd been that terrible night, desperate, starving, certain she was going to watch her children die. She thought about the fear that had ruled her, the walls she'd built, the way she'd nearly refused the help that saved them. And she thought about now. About the home she'd made, the family she'd built, the love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances into something unshakable. She'd been raising 3 kids in a tent when a cowboy rode up and said she'd sleep under a roof that night. He'd given her shelter. He'd given her work. He'd given her dignity and hope and a reason to keep fighting. And she'd given him something too. A family he never thought he'd have, a love he'd stopped believing in, a purpose that went beyond cattle and land and legacy. They'd saved each other in the end. That was what love did. Not the fairy tale kind, not the easy kind, but the real kind, the kind that grew from shared struggle and earned trust, and the daily choice to show up for each other. "I love you," Maggie said into the quiet. "I love you more. Still not possible. Still going to keep trying." She smiled against his shoulder, and he pulled her closer, and the stars wheeled overhead while they sat together in perfect peace. This was the happy ending she'd stopped believing in. This was the life she'd almost given up on. This was home, and it was hers, earned through suffering, built through courage, held through love. She'd been a desperate widow raising 3 children in a torn canvas tent, And now she was Maggie McAllister, wife and mother and partner, standing on land that belonged to her family, surrounded by people who loved her. The storm that had nearly destroyed her had instead delivered her to everything she'd ever wanted. And she would never, ever take it for granted. Not for a single day. Not for a single moment. Because she knew now what she hadn't known then, that life could be brutal and beautiful. That loss and love could exist in the same heart, that the darkest nights often gave way to the brightest dawns. She'd survived the darkness. She'd found the light. And she was finally completely, irrevocably home.